Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui in Beijing. Aung San Suu Kyi, Myanmar State Councillor and Minister for Foreign Affairs, has begun an official visit to China for 4 days at the invitation of Chinese Premier Li Keqiang. It will be her first official visit to another country outside the ASEAN region and her second trip to China. With China being the largest investor in Myanmar and its major trading partner, what is on the agenda of Suu Kyi's visit, and how important will it be in kickstarting better relations between the two? With me in the studio are Teng Jianqun and Jia Xiudong, both from the China Institute of International Studies. And joining us by phone from Delhi will be Professor M.D. Nalapad of Manipur University. But first, let's take a look at this background report.
Reaching out. This isn't the first time that Aung San Suu Kyi has visited China. In June last year, she led a delegation to Beijing and met with China's President Xi Jinping. The trip marked a warming of relations between China and Myanmar. Earlier this year, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi also visited Myanmar and met with Aung San Suu Kyi.
China is pleased to stand by Myanmar and continue to be a good neighbor, a good friend, and a good partner.
Myanmar falls within the framework of China's One Belt, One Road initiative. The Bangladesh-China-India-Myanmar Economic Corridor project is another Chinese initiative likely to benefit the country. And Myanmar is also eyeing the AIIB for more infrastructure cooperation. Last year, Aung San Suu Kyi led the NLD to a majority win in Myanmar's first openly contested election in 25 years. This has turned the page for the country, but many challenges still lie ahead. Topping the list is its internal peace process negotiations, also a key issue for Suu Kyi during her China trip. Last October, 8 armed rebel groups signed a national ceasefire agreement, while many others refused. But more of these groups are edging closer to joining in a peace conference that will run from the last day of August for 5 days. Myanmar has also invited its biggest neighbour China to participate as a key observer. With Myanmar in a state of transition, maintaining good working relations through the journey could be a challenge for both nations, and no doubt Aung San Suu Kyi's visit is a good start.
A good start of the bilateral relationship between Myanmar and China, no doubt about this. However, what will be the major issues on the agenda between Aung San Suu Kyi and Premier Li Keqiang?
At least two topics will be touched upon during the dialogue between the two leaders. The first is the economic cooperation. I think China has been the largest trade partner of Myanmar for decades, and the momentum has been so far so good, especially in the cooperation in the investment of China and also the infrastructure construction in that country. This is the first topic. The second should be the peaceful process in Myanmar. Actually, there is some connection between the two countries in dealing with the clash of the ethnic groups very close to the Chinese border. So I think at least the two topics will be touched upon during the meeting between the two leaders.
And Xiudong, how do you characterize the pragmatic diplomacy of Aung San Suu Kyi in terms of balancing major powers in her country?
There has been political change in Myanmar, and the people thought that Myanmar might be walking away from China and turn to the United States or Japan. But we have seen that actually the new administration in Myanmar has taken a very pragmatic approach in its policy towards China. It has certainly it is aware the importance of China to the interests of Myanmar politically, economically, and also in terms of domestic peace process. So also, I believe that Myanmar knows that China does not interfere in the internal affairs of Myanmar, and China is actually supports Myanmar in its domestic priorities, for example, economic development and ethnic reconciliation. So that's why actually that is the fundamental reason that the new government in Myanmar is taking a very practical and pragmatic approach in its policy towards China.
To have a new beginning, in the relationship with the PRC, I'm afraid Madam Aung San Suu Kyi got to improve the trust between the NLD, National League of Democracy, and the military junta. Forgive me for saying Myanmar junta, but the military is said to have controlled the administration at the local level, lurking behind the political scenario in Myanmar, despite the democracy and the process of democratization there. So, how do you describe the process of national reconciliation within Myanmar, not only between the armed ethnic groups in the borderline, but also between Suu Kyi and the military?
Yeah, the military has been a very important player in Myanmar's politics at least for decades, and the military ruling actually has got the sanctions from the Western countries and also get some, criticism domestically. So this is actually a big change for Myanmar from the military ruling to the civilian government, and the leadership of Aung San Suu Kyi and her colleagues, I'm sure the development of the society and the improvement of social life should be on the top agenda for the people and for the politicians. Of course, the military, even today, is still playing very key role in the infrastructure construction. For example, the project signed by the military government and still be used today. And some of them, were suspended by the civilian government. So this is actually a struggle that will be continued in the future. But I think after the reconciliation among the different groups of politics, they can, reach some consensus in the development of the country and also improving the social life of Myanmar.
Xu Dong, 5 years ago, in the year 2011, the military-backed government of President Tan Son ordered the suspension of the massive Chinese invested Misung Dam project, which is, of course, a mega project. Most of the Chinese were shocked and caught unprepared, of course. A lot of expectations and hopes have been placed on Suu Kyi and her reconciliatory role in the national peace process. Do you think she could use her influence to lobby for a resumption of this project, which really concerns billions of dollars?
Yes, I think that she is not actually outright opposed to such kind of mega project in Myanmar. For example, when it comes to the investment of Chinese investment in the Lep Patong copper mines, actually there was also opposition to this project, but Aung San Suu Kyi led a delegation to visit the site and actually invest personally into the project, and later found that actually the project was feasible. But also she made some proposal to improve the impact of the project there. For example, the improvement of environment and better plans for relocation of the villagers. And then actually she gave the blessing to the copper project. I think the same thing may take place in this for this project, the Mason project. But is at the end of the day, Myanmar realized that this project is good for the economic development there. Actually, this project itself has taken care of the demand and needs and requests of the local residents.
Right, let me cross over to Professor Amdi Nalapad, who's standing by in New Delhi. Hello.
Hello.
What do you think of the enormous influence that Aung San Suu Kyi might leverage in not only facilitating the national reconciliation peace process, but also revitalizing the economy that involves a massive Chinese investment? Taking the Misung Dam as an example, what do you think of her ability to lobby?
Well, I think the ability will be quite substantial. We must remember that some faraway countries were expecting that the new government, which is effectively led by Aung San Suu Kyi, would have a hostile relationship with China. Instead, Aung San Suu Kyi has made it very clear that she wants a very friendly relationship with China. And the reason for that is she understands that her success is going to depend on the providing of jobs and income to the people of Myanmar, especially the younger generation. So she is looking to China for investment, she's looking to China for jobs, and as a consequence, she's adopting an extremely pragmatic policy towards China.
Well, the prosperity of Myanmar, of course, depends on both Chinese investment, which accounts for most of the FDI in this country. It also depends on the inter-regional trade and interconnectivity between, for example, India, Bangladesh, China, and Myanmar. What do you think of the importance of having this economic corridor that connects the two countries along the coastline of the Indian Ocean?
Well, the fact of the matter is that this interconnection is very, very important for the future of the entire region. And hopefully there will be interconnection, both road and rail. It will improve very significantly in the future. Now you have the Asian Infrastructure Bank, and I think this kind of an interconnection project would be a very, very major project of this the bank that has been set up. And so far as Myanmar is concerned, Myanmar and India are neighbors, Myanmar and China are neighbors. India and China are the largest neighbors of each other, India in terms of population, and China in terms of population and area as well. So from this point of view, this kind of interconnection is a very, very good idea. And it's good that Myanmar has got a very good and productive relations with China, because it's very important that the countries of the region should have a friendly relationship with each other.
The democratically elected government, Mr. Teng Jianqun and Mr. Jia Shudong, in India has long held suspicions about China's ambition and blueprint concerning the regional prosperity along the coastline of India, and they characterize this with the theory of a Appo Theory, of a conspiracy. Having said this, what do you think are what do you think are the major stakes of India in Myanmar?
Of course, as a neighbor of Myanmar, India has played a very important role in the economic issue and also the security issue in that country. And especially in recent years, especially India had adopted so-called eastward policy. Actually, Myanmar has become bridge for India's eastward policy toward the ASEAN nations. So I think at this moment, India has been very cautious about any cooperation between China and Myanmar. For example, the pipelines, at least two pipelines, that have already been constructed in Myanmar. One is for gas, another is for oil from the Middle East. So I think this is actually a win-win cooperation for China, for Myanmar, and also for India. India can enjoy the pipeline and some other infrastructure construction in Myanmar. So India should not worry about the cooperation between China and Myanmar in every aspect at this moment.
Yes, indeed, the far-flung network of pipelines that helps ship oil from the Middle East and gas as well to this region will benefit all the major economies on the periphery of China. But what do you think of China's concerns on the Malacca Strait in case of hostilities between China and other major economies? Will the pin our hopes on Myanmar, where the newly established port, along with Hambantota port in Sri Lanka, and Gwadar deepwater port in Pakistan, will help China to form what we call the Belt and Road Initiative?
Actually, now China has diversified sources of import of oil and gas. Now, actually, China has built and is building several pipelines, oil pipelines in the south, west, and north, west. One is through Myanmar, and the other is through the Central Asia. So China actually is diversifying, actually, not only the sources of oil and gas, but also the transportation of oil and gas. So China is not so much concerned about the security of Malacca. Of course, China would like to contribute to the fighting against the piracy in the Malacca Straits, and actually China has so many choices, options, different options, and so that actually I don't think China is so much concerned.
Thank you very much. You are watching Dialogue with Mr. Teng Jianqun and Mr. Jia Shudong. We are also talking to Professor M.D. Nalapad from India. The centerpiece of our discussion is very much about the current official visit by Aung San Suu Kyi, the second trip to China and the first outside ASEAN since she took office after the democratic election in that very poor country. We'll be back in a short while. Stay with us. Welcome back. Media attention has focused on the national reconciliation peace process that involves local militias in the borderline or in northern Myanmar that shares the border with China. Yeah. Given the history, the ethnicity of the local minority groups in this particular part of Myanmar, what do you think of the role that the Chinese can play? I mean, the Chinese government could play in facilitating such a process of national reconciliation?
Actually, China has been a very important player in the reconciliation of the peace process in the northern part of Myanmar for the ethnic clashes there. You know, it's an issue of history, and it's also a history of ethnic clash. So this time, I'm sure China is very willing to help the Myanmar's government, especially the current government, to continue the momentum of reconciliation. For example, on 31st this month, there should be a big conference with the name of 21st Century Prolonged Conference, which is very important. All the 15 ethnic groups are all invited now, but only 8 agreed to participate in the conference. So this is actually...
What is behind the reluctance for the other groups?
Because of the benefit, the interests of their own. So they need the Chinese give some support, assistance in this regard, so they can invite all the ethnic groups near the border area, so they can give any cooperation with the government.
Thank you very much. Let me cross over to Professor M.D. Nalapad for his comments on the peace process in northern Myanmar. Hello. Don't you think the overseas observers has obviously overestimated the Chinese influence over the reconciliation there?
Well, the fact of the matter is that unfortunately many of these groups have now become businesses, and they're making a lot of money out of the insurgency. The sad reality is that in many parts of the world, insurgency is very profitable for some individuals who are leading the insurgency. And in Myanmar, unfortunately, we have the problem of narcotics. We have the problem of other economic and other elements of the situation. And therefore, I am not very optimistic that all these groups are going to come to the table. The reality is some of these groups are making a lot of money out of narcotics. They're making a lot of money out of gun running and weapon smuggling, and this is going to continue. What is very important is that all the neighbors of Myanmar, China, India, and other neighbors, we should ensure that all the flow of weapons and other assistance to any of these groups stop, because it's very important to have a united Myanmar. I'm sure that Aung San Suu Kyi is going to be talking in terms of a united Myanmar, but I do also believe that it's going to be a very long haul ahead of her before true peace comes in that part of Myanmar.
Now, Professor Nalapad, your note of caution in the response has somehow reflected the strategic mistrust between India and China, doesn't it? Given the history of a border clash back in the early 1960s, that Myanmar will be used allegedly by China to serve as a proxy state and to build a sphere of influence. Do you think this is a concern that's shared by policymakers in your country? China is, of course, the biggest investor, and we are the biggest trading partner of Myanmar. If you put these factors into your perspective, what do you think of the Chinese observation that India is concerned that Myanmar could be used as a proxy?
See, I'd like to point out that in India we have multiple opinions, and we have some opinions that are very friendly to China and some opinions that are very hostile to China, as indeed we have in China or the United States or any other very large country with a lot of diverse opinions. I don't believe that too many people in India believe that India and China should enter into a hostile relationship. I am quite certain the Prime Minister would like to see a constructive relationship with China. And I've talked to very important people in the Foreign Ministry, and they're all agreed about that. So I really don't think that there is any question of India adopting a policy of mistrust or hostility towards China, but it is very, very clear that these groups are not really reflecting official support. They may be getting support from the ground by some elements in different countries, and that is my point. It is certainly not my point that the official system in China is in any way helping any of these people, because the reality is the Chinese government has adopted a very constructive and friendly attitude towards the new government in Myanmar, and it has adopted a very welcoming attitude towards Aung San Suu Kyi.
Thank you very much, Professor Nelapant, for being with us. Let's look at the issue of South China Sea with a joint statement between the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and his counterparts of ASEAN in the recently concluded Foreign Ministers meeting about the South China Sea. What do you think of the position of Myanmar?
Myanmar, has been very neutral in recent decades over the dispute in the South China Sea, as compared with
simply because it's not a party to the conflict.
Yeah, not a claimant of the dispute in the South China Sea. So I think, according to the recent history, we can see that the officials, no matter under the military ruling or the civilian government, they all gave a very pragmatic and credible support for the Chinese position, because China's position is very clear and it's legal. And China asks all the nations in this region should show respect to the history and also to the international law, not only the UN clause. So Myanmar has been very neutral in recent decades.
However, one thing can be hardly covered up. That is the dual-track approach by almost all of the member states of ASEAN. The dual-track implies, on the one hand, they enjoy the umbrella of security protection from the United States government, but they turn to China for investment to maintain the co-prosperity in this area. Do you think Myanmar shares much the same? And by the way, Xiu-Dong, what do you think of the American official policy towards the arms embargo, if any, or the release of all of the political dissidents who have been imprisoned during the period of the military junta?
When President Obama came into office, he adopted the rebalancing to Asia strategy. Actually, Southeast Asia is a pillar of that strategy. Certainly, improvement of relations with Myanmar is one of the priorities in this rebalancing strategy. That's why we see that the United States lifted some sanctions against Myanmar. Its Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, even President Obama visited Myanmar, and they also increased investment there. So, some people thought that because of the U.S. increased investment in Myanmar, Myanmar may turn away from China and then turn to the embrace of the United States. Actually, believe that Myanmar knows that actually, not only it has very close economic trade relations with China, but also in terms of security, China is also a very, very important factor. And earlier we talked about the ethnic and national reconciliation in Myanmar. And it is not only good for Myanmar to have this economic, ethnic reconciliation, also in China's own interest to support the ethnic reconciliation and also support domestic tranquility in Myanmar. So I think that Myanmar itself actually is trying to strike a balance among different major powers. That is in Myanmar's interest. Of course, that's delicate, and it's a very delicate kind of balancing act to make.
Let's look at the issue of solidarity of ASEAN, a very successful regional economic bloc. And by the way, last year they were able to form the ASEAN community.
Yeah.
But do you think the military presence of the United States, along with its allies, Japan and Australia, have successfully divided ASEAN with the arbitral tribunal?
I don't think the United States and some other third parties will suspend the activities in the South China Sea, because this is actually a policy adopted by the country like the United States for the rebalance strategy in this region. And the ASEAN countries, all the 10 countries, I mean, have already, had a very clear-cut vision toward the presence of U.S. military and also the intervention in this region, and especially after the ruling of arbitration issued last month, they suddenly recognized that the United States, all the activities played by the United States are only for the U.S. sake, not for the Philippines, not for the Malaysia and for other member states in ASEAN. And so I think after the ruling, issued, now the South China Sea suddenly has become a calm sea. So this is actually a fundamental change for the situation. But I don't think the countries like the United States will stop its military presence and all the so-called freedom of navigation in that region. This is actually a strategy by the United States to have a balanced, so-called policy toward China, toward ASEAN countries.
Quiet water runs deep, Xiu Dong. What do you think will be the next stage of development that involves all of the member states of ASEAN, however divided they might be on the territorial disputes, with the Philippines and Vietnam being in the forefront of claiming the sovereignty?
Despite all these, disputes over in the islands in the South China Sea, given all this rhetoric, hot rhetoric about the disputes there is actually now a consensus among the most ASEAN countries that it is in the mutual interest of China and ASEAN to focus on areas of cooperation, economic, political, strategic, and even defense, rather than on this kind of dispute. They will not actually allow the dispute in the South China Sea to be a kind of barrier for the cooperation between China and ASEAN. And that is, we can see very clearly, even especially after the arbitration ruling in The Hague. And we see that most of the ASEAN countries actually support bilateral dialogue among this claimant and sea, and also supports a multilateral platform between China and ASEAN to ensure peace and stability in the area. That's what we call dual approach towards the issue of South China Sea.
Given the growing entanglement of a geopolitical rivalry between major parties such as the United States, China, India, and Japan in Myanmar, for example, perhaps the official visit by head of a state may not fundamentally change or improve the relationship if you look at the consequences of the deployment of THAAD following the participation of President Pyo King-hui at the military parade last year. With that, we come to the end of this edition of Dialogue. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.